Part 39. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 383. All the loaned cattle have been put into the stalls. Mu Yangling inspected it and asked Zhang Wu, "How is it? What's the statistics?" A total of 4,358 working days are still owed. Mu Yangling pondered for a while, and said, "We will collect the money if you are willing to pay back the money, and we will collect the food if you are willing to pay back. If you are unwilling, let's save it. It will be needed in the autumn harvest." Zhang Wu also meant the same thing. Autumn harvest requires much less time to use cattle than spring plowing. If we save the working days for autumn harvest, we may not need to hire additional short-term labor for autumn harvest. Check to see if there are any cows that have reached the estrus period. If there are any, isolate them separately and breed them. Zhang Wu responded. They are now limited in funds, and it is impossible to bring in new calves. After making arrangements, Mu Yangling rode away. In fact, she didn't need to worry about the cattle farm. Zhang Wuzhang and Lu brothers did a good job, and there was enough pasture in the cattle farm. Some time ago, the brothers even took the cattle farm with them. The workers began to cut pastures to dry and store, which shows their thoughtfulness. Mu Yangling went to the nursery. She was going to see her dozens of hectares of land, where she spent most of her time this year, because these lands will be one of her biggest incomes in a year. Another the share is the dividend from Fan Zijan. But the results I made were still different. The corn can already be split and eaten. Mu Yangling let the horse walk slowly along the field, paying attention to the situation of the cornfield in the field. There is at least one corn cob hanging on each cornstalk. Mu Yangling chose a few. When the place is broken open, it is found that the particles are quite full. Lu Lang and Zai Yuheng, who ran from the nursery, rushed to Mu Yangling panting, "Cousin, why didn't you go back to the nursery first? We waited for so long for nothing." "I'll go back when I'm done watching." Mu Yangling got into the cornfield, went deep and broke another one at random. Seeing the two people coming in, he smiled and said, "Look at the situation, this year's harvest is good." Speaking of this, Zai Yuheng is also very happy. This year, the rain in Hanzhong Prefecture is good. Not only the corn is good, but the wheat is also growing well, but the rice is not so good. However, Lu Lang looks sad. The distance between Hanzhong Mansion and Xingzhou Mansion is not very big, and the weather here can be regarded as smooth, but Xingzhou Mansion is still dry. Last time I went home to see, I still wanted to see corn, and I could barely see wheat. The rice is almost dying of drought, and Grandpa also said that he will never grow rice again next year. Across a mountain, there may be rain and sunshine, not to mention the gap between the two prefectures. Mu Yangling patted him on the shoulder. "Okay, it's God's job whether it rains or not, so let's not worry about him. Come on, check with me, dozens of hectares of land. I don't know if I've finished running in 6 days." Mu Yangling did not entrust others to manage these lands, but did it by herself, so she was very familiar with these lands, and she knew how far away she should randomly check. It is nothing more than looking at weeds, insect diseases, and growth problems. Both Lu Lang and Zai Yuheng are used to doing farm work, so they know how to distinguish, and they are happy to follow Mu Yangling around. When Mu Yangling got deep into the cornfield again, there was a scream from Zai Yuheng. Mu Yangling was startled, thinking she had encountered something, hurriedly separated the corn stalks and broke in, asking loudly, "Zai Yuheng, what's wrong with you?" On the other side, Lu Lang also quickly went to Zai Yuheng. "Cousin, come and take a look, I found a very strange corn." When Mu Yangling rushed to Zai Yuheng's side, Lu Lang was standing beside her with a dark face, and said dissatisfiedly, "Can't you make it clear? You almost scared me to death." Zai Yuheng was still excitedly gesturing to Mu Yangling to look at the corn in her hand. "Cousin, look quickly, the black corn." Mu Yangling narrowed his eyes slightly. He didn't expect to be able to breed corn of other colors so early. Mu Yangling felt and pinched it in, and found that the slurry was sticky and thick. She said excitedly, "This may be waxy corn." Glutinous corn, Ziyuheng and Lu Lang were puzzled. Just like the difference between the rice we usually eat and glutinous rice, waxy corn is softer and easier to swallow than corn, but the yield is lower. Mu Yangling wrapped the corn's buds and restored it to its original state, eyes sparkled and said, "I don't know if I can find other colors, such as white, purple, or purple-red. It seems that when harvesting corn, people should pay attention to it, pick out all the different species, and plant them next year. Maybe several more varieties of corn will be added in a few years." Lu Lang and Ziyuheng were puzzled. In their opinion, no matter how mutated corn is, isn't it still corn? Mu Yangling laughed and said, "Can you compare the rice we eat with the japonica rice eaten in the palace? They are all rice too." Lu Lang understood. "Does that mean waxy corn is better than the corn we grow now?" "That depends on which aspect," Mu Yangling said. "The green rice is delicious, why don't we grow it?" "Because the output is not enough, we have to work carefully and take care of it carefully, and we can't be negligent at all," Ziyuheng said. Mu Yangling nodded. "That's the reason, waxy corn must also have this problem?" "Then why do we have to work so hard to cultivate this?" In Lu Lang and Ziyuheng's view, the output is the most important thing, because nothing is more important than having enough food. It's up to each individual to choose which variety to plant, but there are also choices. What we want to do is to let everyone have more choices, not only corn, but also wheat and rice," Mu Yangling said ambitiously. Mu Yangling marked the corn, and when he saw that it was getting late, he took the two of them back, and decided to come back to see the wheat tomorrow. The crops in Hanzhong Prefecture are indeed good. The wheat and rice have been filled with grain. At this stage, it seems that the spikes are long and the grains are large. As long as the grain is solidified, the water and soil behind it can keep up, and there are no pests, then her dozens of hectares of land this year can barely be counted. It's a good harvest. Many people are envious of Mu Yangling's land. If it weren't for the military camp nearby, and her nursery has raised more than 1,000 children, there might be troubles in this land. When Mu Yangling arrived at the nursery, he happened to be having dinner in the courtyard. When the children saw Mu Yangling, they all gathered around. "The girl is here. Hi girl. Would you like to have dinner with us, girl?" Mu Yangling has corrected her a few times and asked them to call her sister Mu, but they may be a little scared, or because of admiration. Anyway, although they agreed on the surface, next time Mu Yangling comes, it will still be girl, girl shouted. Mu Yangling looked around, but didn't see Mr. Lu and Bowen, so he waved and said, "Okay, you go and eat, I'll go find Mr. Lu." Mu Yangling glanced at their rice bowl and asked with a smile, "What's for today?" "Pork stew with cabbage." Mu Yangling frowned slightly. "Why are you still eating cabbage now? Is there not enough vegetables in the vegetable field?" "The vegetables in the nursery are all self-sufficient." Mu Yangling used all the 16 acres of land behind to grow vegetables for them, not only vegetables, but also some melons and fruits. If the collective is not too large, Mu Yangling expressly forbids. Well, some children even want to carry vegetables into the city to sell and earn some private money. A child smiled shyly, and said, "We still think cabbage is more delicious, and the other dishes are usually eaten fresh." Ziyuheng lay next to Mu Yangling's ear and said, "The cabbage is only put in when the meat is cooked, and other vegetables will not taste good after being cooked in a big pot." Mu Yangling was thoughtful. There are too many people and too few pots and stoves. She has eaten big pot dishes, and to be honest, they are really not very tasty. The big pot of dishes here does not refer to a pot of cooking for 5 or 6 people, but hundreds of them. Mu Yangling thought for a while and said, "Then build another row of houses in the back row as a kitchen, and one pot of cooking for 10 people will do. This should improve a lot." "Yep, It costs money again. But Ziyuheng didn't persuade her, she knew she couldn't persuade her. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 384. Mr. Lu was instructing blog posts to write policy theories. Seeing that Mu Yangling nodded slightly, he lowered his head and continued to read. He has already decided to participate in this year's autumn festival, so the time is very tight. Mu Yangling didn't bother him, and bowed to Bowen before stepping back. Taking a breath of fresh air, Bowen couldn't help but patted his chest and said, "It's so stressful to read a book together now." Mu Yangling touched his head with a smile, but Bowen shook her hand and said with a pouted, "Sister, I have grown up, I can't touch my head anymore." Mu Yangling withdrew his hand graciously. "After checking the situation here, I want to go home and have a look. Will you go back with me?" "How many days?" "I can finish the work in about 5 days here, and I will probably stay for 7 or 8 days when I go home." "Of course, you can only stay for 2 or 3 days, and you still have to study. I will let Cousin Lang see you off." Bowen nodded after thinking for a while. "Then I told my husband, hurry up with your homework, I'm going home for 3 days." Mu Yangling nodded with a smile. Bowen went home to match his mother and younger siblings, and Mu Yangling went back mainly to see the conditions of the experimental field. The weather in Xinzhou Prefecture is still not good this year. This is unfortunate for Mu Yangling, but it is also fortunate. In this way, unfortunately, the crops in the field will definitely have to fail. Fortunately, those rice seeds can be tested. Can it be drought resistant? When Mu Yangling returned to Chenggutun, Lu Ting and Lu Yuan were also in the field, and they were fertilizing an acre of rice to compare with the situation of no fertilization. Seeing her, Lu Ting was very excited and said, "Aling, the seeds that survived last year's drought are indeed much better than the previous ones. Look at the comparison between the two sides. Last year's seeds were 80% full of grout. They are good seeds bought from grain shops like everyone else. Up to now, only 30% of the grouting has been done, and the difference is too obvious." For the convenience of observation, they chose 2 adjacent plots for the experiment, which can be compared by looking left and right. Mu Yangling pinched the ears of rice that had just been filled with grain, and his eyes sparkled. "Pay special attention to the pests on the drought-resistant side. Last time I came here, I found that the rice here seems to attract pests." Lu Yuan said nonchalantly, "It grows well here and there is something to eat, and the pests will come naturally." Mu Yangling is not sure if this is the reason. "We have to find a place to try again. At least the growth conditions on both sides must be similar to compare. I don't know when I will get a conclusion, but it will take a long time to do this." Time. Whether it's the reason or not, it must be recorded in detail. Although the grout has been filled now, it will take more than a month to harvest. If something goes wrong, the 5 acres of rice will be useless. Lu Ting's face was solemn. Lu Yuan looked at the 2 of them, and said, "It's all grouted." Chen Sanzu and Su Jian also laughed and said, "Girl, although there is still more than a month to go, we farmers can estimate the harvest just by looking at the grout filling." Mu Yangling was puzzled. "Have you never encountered rice blast or insect disaster?" In her previous life, when she went to play in the fields, she often heard the complaints from the farmers that they were all harvested, but encountered rice blast or pests, and the grains were not harvested. It became clearer when I came into contact with planting in this life. Chen Sanzu said, "I have encountered insect disasters before, but I have only seen it once when I was so old. It is quite miserable. Hula, 1 mu of land can't even harvest seeds, but we shouldn't be so unlucky, right? My father, it's only happened once in a lifetime." Su Jian asked curiously, "What is rice blast?" Lu Ting and Lu Yuan were both curious. Mu Yangling didn't know either. She tried hard to recall the rice blast mentioned by the peasant uncles that year, and described, it seems that the rice stalk or the bottom is sick, and the nutrition and water cannot be transported to the top, and then the rice is about to mature. Died, haven't you seen it? Lu Ting and Lu Yuan shook their heads. Chen Sanzu was the oldest, and he had never heard of it, but Su Jian thought about it seriously, and said, I seem to have heard it from the old man in our village, but I don't remember it clearly. But girl, whether it is insect pests or rice blasts, we generally don't encounter them, not necessarily once in 10 years. So the bugs in this world are so conscientious? Creatures that could not be killed by pesticides in the previous life are not particularly worried here. Then you can estimate the yield, but you still need to record their growth status. Mu Yangling paused, and said, take a look in the field to see if there are any male rice that grows particularly well but does not head. The four of them stared wide-eyed. Is the rice divided into male and female? This name was chosen by Mu Yangling herself, and she has never studied agriculture, so she can only deduce it from some general impressions. Rices are generally hermaphroditic, but some rice plants only have males, so they seem to only bloom and not bear fruit. The rice is very drought and disaster resistant. I want to cross it with the rice we are planting now. I don't know what the result will be, but the premise is that such rice can be found. Mu Yangling's idea opened another door for everyone, and Lu Ting thought about it. It's almost like grafting fruit trees. Mu Yangling nodded. The principle is similar. It is to combine two varieties together in order to get a better variety, not only this kind of male rice, but also the wild rice that grows in the wild. They are in the wild and no one fertilizes the loose land. Watering and weeding, but it can grow tenaciously. In some respects, it must be better than the rice grown in our fields. Although I don't know whether the rice produced by mating will be better than the current one, but after a few more experiments, maybe it will be. Find good rice seeds, at least everyone will have a choice in the end. When the four of them heard the words, they were all eager to try. Even if they haven't read many books, they know that if they can breed a new rice seed, this feat is enough to go down in history. This made the eyes of the four who thought they would be mediocre all turn red. Mu Yangling gave them the direction, looked at the situation in the field again, and then turned back. Chen Sanzu and Su Jian Lu Yuan continued to fertilize, but Lu Ting went back with Mu Yangling. The three of them didn't care. When they were four, they were also led by Lu Ting. Lu Yuan is because Lu Ting is the eldest brother, and the family has always listened to him, and they are used to it. Chen Sanzu and Su Jian had no choice. They were Mu Yangling's long-term workers, but Lu Ting and Lu Yuan were Mu Yangling's cousins. Moreover, Mu Yangling also said that he would listen to Lu Ting's orders, so seeing Lu Ting following Mu Yangling back, they only thought he was going to report the situation. Lu Ting did report the situation, but this is only one aspect. He wanted to borrow agricultural books with Mu Yangling to read. Did you read all those things from agricultural books? Mu Yangling shook his head. Some are not, uncle. Sometimes reading requires more brains, and thinking is the only way to open up a new road, although I don't know whether that road leads to the abyss or to the Sunshine Avenue, but we have to discover it before we can go up, and only when we go up can we know the situation behind. If it is an abyss, we will turn back, right down that road, and then take another one. If it is Sunshine Avenue, we will go forward while walking. We can also see if we can find more roads, so that we have more Sunshine Avenues to choose from. Lu Ting nodded thoughtfully. Then you can give me 2 agricultural books, and your uncle and I can read them in our spare time. Mu Yangling nodded with a smile, went back to the room to get the book, and gave him a 3-character classic. By the way, I mean to send cousin Lun and the others to study, but they don't seem to be willing. Actually, it's not that they want to take the exam, the imperial examination, but knowing more characters is always beneficial. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 385. Lu Ting said with some embarrassment, they are impatient to study, and they don't have that talent. Let them stay at home and do farm work. Mu Yangling pondered for a moment, then said, Uncle, you go back and talk to your cousins. If they are willing, I will send them to the academy for 2 years to learn all the characters first. As for later, if you don't want to continue studying, you can also learn other skills, and I will specially invite my husband to teach them. This is the meaning that Shu Xiaoquan was handed over by Mu Yang. How can this work? Lu Ting frowned and said, Aling, this pie is too big. You have a lot of cousins, and there must be a lot of people in the clan who want to share the pie. The Mu family was very helpful to the Lu family. When they were in Linshan village, they only focused on their family, and the whole village followed suit. But since they moved out and everyone became a member of the military, Mu Yangling gradually didn't do everything like before. Pulling the Lu family, but only taking care of them, the 2 closest blood relatives, and sometimes reaching out to pull Lu Li's mother and son. Even the patriarch Lu He's family didn't pay much attention. Mu Yangling sent things to the Lu family from time to time, which can be said to be filial to Lu Daqian and Lu Erqian. People in the clan can't say anything even if they are jealous. Who made Lu Daqian and Lu Erqian the closest blood relationship to the Mu family? Mu Yangling pulls his uncle and cousin, but it is true that Lu Ting and Lu Yuan come to help Mu Yangling work in the field every now and then, and their wages are also for real work. It's not that no one has come to see the Lu brothers. I hope that I can tell Mu Yangling in the face of my fellow clansmen that we can make a fortune together. But Lu Ting said 1 sentence is enough to recruit people, and I can't let Aling spend money to hire people and he can send people away. As for Lu Lang, the reason is even more readily available. He followed Mu Yangling, but it was also because he learned the ability to manage accounts. On the contrary, some people say that Mu Yangling taught that ability, but he can not only make a plan but also keep accounts for half a year. Other disciples of the Lu family can naturally do it. I heard that they don't even know the words, so they can only stop their efforts. But if Mu Yangling sent Lu Lun and the others to study and learn crafts, the temptation would be too great, because they didn't help Mu Yangling with anything, and everyone would come to her at that time, and everyone would be her cousin brother. What should she do? Therefore, although Lu Ting was very moved, he hesitated for a long time and still gritted his teeth and refused. The first thing he learned from his father when he was a child was to repay his kindness and not trouble others, even close relatives. Cousin, isn't it reasonable for Cousin Lang to send money to send his cousins to study? Mu Yangling blinked and said, if you don't have enough money, you can borrow some from me. Lu Ting was stunned, and Mu Yangling persuaded with a smile, cousin, I send my cousins to study, and it is also selfish to learn crafts. There are only 2 younger brothers in my family, and my parents are also old. I'm afraid I won't have any more children. My Mu family has no relatives, so I can only rely on myself. Bowen and Bosi are weak. I hope they can have more people to help, just like Cousin Lang now. Even if they are not by my side in the future, he has done it, he has the ability, and he can make a career out of it, and if Bowen and Bosi have something to do in the future, he can also ask him to help. They're cousins, and they're supposed to help each other. But that also requires their ability, Mu Yangling said, the more capable my cousins are, the easier it will be for Bowen and Bosi in the future. Take it as my selfishness. Lu Ting looked at Mu Yangling complicatedly, and said, we are the ones who benefit from your selfishness. Lu Ting also knew that what Mu Yangling said was true. The relationship between the 2 families is indeed very good now. If his son and nephew are successful, judging from the current development of the 2 families, the relationship between the 2 families will probably be better than the relationship in the clan. Even better. So he nodded and agreed, then I'll go back and tell your uncle and them to send all those boys to the academy. Don't worry, even if they don't want to learn, I will follow their example. Mu Yangling nodded with a smile, lit a candle in his heart for his cousins who were like wild horses, and said, "Cousin, if someone in the family asks, they will say that Cousin Lang gave the money. As for Cousin Lang, where did you come from?" He said that he met a nobleman in Jingzhou Mansion, more than half of it was his own salary, and the other half was borrowed from me. Since you want to expand Bo and Bosie's network, why don't you find more children from the clan? Lu Ting asked suspiciously. Those are members of the Lu family, not the Mu family. Cousin, not everyone is like you when Zhenmai is kind and jealous. Bosie and Bowen's helpers are good but not many after all. Mu Yangling just doesn't like trouble. Lu Daqian and Lu Erkin are different, they know kindness and interest. The most important thing is that Lu Daqian has always been afraid of troubling them and owed too much favor, so he has been suppressing his cousins below. Over the years, Mu Yangling has helped the Lu family a lot, and the Lu family has also given back a lot. As long as there is something on the Mu family, even if the Lu family is busy planting seeds, they will drop their work and come to help. And the two families have never had any beautiful and spoiled incidents, and the Lu family has never used her name to do anything, and is very low-key. It can be said that more than half of the reason why Mu Yangling helped and supported the Lu family so unscrupulously was that Lu Daqian and Lu Erkin suppressed the Lu family. Otherwise, she would not have paid such a big deal even if she wanted to help the Lu family. Force. Although Lu Ting was sorry, he didn't bring up this topic again. After returning home with Lu Yuan, he told Mu Yangling what he said, "Aling, let us go to the county to find a better academy. You don't need to be highly respected, sir. It's good to be flexible, these children are not suitable for studying. If the husband insists on being harsh, they will probably not like reading even more." Lu Yuan looked at his son and nephew enviously, kicked their buttocks, and said, "How dare you despise them when you have a book? You can't beat them to death. These boys have a much better life than us." Lu Ting just smiled. "Let's listen to Aling, she is very good at teaching children." Lu Daqian nodded. "Sir," you brothers quietly inquired, "please keep quiet about sending the children to the academy." After speaking, he stared at the children and said, "You are not allowed to go out and shout, do you understand?" "Understood." Grandpa Lu Lun took the lead to respond, but asked eagerly, "Then we have to study for a few years, Grandpa? If you can't read well, you can't beat me. I really don't know how to read." Lu Yang and Lu Ying on the side nodded repeatedly. They had a book from their cousin at home, and their elder brother could read, so he followed suit for a while. At first, he was still interested, but later on he couldn't read it because of the stick. Lu Zhang and Lu Sun, who were secretly happy, wished they could beat up the three children. They despised an opportunity that others couldn't ask for. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 386. Mrs. Lu Zhao also gave her son a look. Lu Lun stood aside with his neck shrunk, but the Lu family has always been democratic, so although he shrunk his neck, he still looked at his grandfather with wide eyes. Lu Daqian sighed regretfully, "Aling is the one who knows how to read the most in our family. In the past, Aling taught him to read. After he went to learn, he would squat in the yard and practice calligraphy stroke by stroke with branches. At night, he used the moonlight to make gestures in the yard by himself. In the past, our family had no ability to send him to school. At that time, the Mu family couldn't even get together the Shuxiu of Bowen, let alone an opportunity like yours. Yes. Children, you should cherish your blessings. Brother, send people to the academy. If anyone doesn't study hard, they will be caught and beat upside down." Lu Erkin glared at his grandson and grandnephew fiercely and said, "Do you know how much we have to pay you every year? 1 year is 5 taels of silver, plus pen, ink, paper, and inkstone. 1 person is 10 taels a year, 3 people is 30 taels, and you can't even earn half of the silver if you sell it." Ludakian glared at his younger brother, then turned his head and said to the three children standing in front of him, "Your second grandpa's words are rough and reasonable. If the money is paid by our family, it will be spent if it is spent. You are reborn in our family, it is good no matter what, it's all from our Lu family. If you spend the money on you, it's considered a bad debt if it's not worth it, but this money is given to you by your cousin, 30 taels a year, based on what I know about your cousin. In order not to let you lose face in the academy, I'm afraid I will buy you fabrics to make some new clothes. After 3 or 4 years, even 150 taels will not be able to stop you. I know how many things 150 taels can do." Ludakian met the eyes of several children and said, "If you can build 2 good houses, you can also buy 2 cows and 6 pigs, and then eat meat every other day, which can last for half a year." Several children opened their mouths wide, and even the oldest Lurong's eyes widened, stunned. Ludakian's calculations were the most intuitive. The adults often talked about the badness of the earthen house at home. It always leaked rain and wind. They were afraid that they would not be able to live in it for many years. Then they worried about building the house, saying that they had worked hard for 10 years and wondered if they could build a house. There are also cows. No one in the village has a cow. If anyone has a cow, it is a middle peasant, and their life is much better than theirs. Pigs, their family has them, but when they catch a little piglet, the grandmas will lose sleep once, because the family either needs a few bags of grain or spends all their money. Meat, if it wasn't for my cousin who sent some meat to their family every now and then, they would eat it once every 6 months just like other families. Lurong and Luyun looked at the brothers with envy and sympathy in their eyes. The 3 boys standing in the middle suddenly felt a lot of pressure. Lulun wanted to express that he didn't want to study anymore. Ludakian seemed to know what his grandson was thinking, pulled him over and patted his head, and asked, "Alun, what do you think of your father and uncle's life?" Lulun's eyes were full of confusion, and he said, "Father and uncle are very good, much better than Tang Shu and the others. They are always envious of father and uncle. That's because your father and uncle are supported by your cousin. If not, they can only be the same as your cousin, and they can't even compare with your cousin." Seeing the dissatisfaction of the children, Ludakian said, putting on a stance, he said, "Don't look at our family's life is better than other families. In terms of foundation, our family is not the weakest, but it is also ranked at the bottom." The children didn't believe it. Lurong whispered, "Grandpa, we have new clothes to wear, and we can eat several meals of meat every month." Luerkin asked with a smile, "Rong, where did you get the new clothes and meat?" After Lurong paused, Lujin, the youngest sitting on the kong, raised her hand and said, I know, my cousin gave it to me. Last time my cousin gave me a wooden horse." Luerkin hugged the 3-year-old Lujin in his arms, and said, "You don't know what your brother knows. It was all given by your cousin, not our family." Ludakian continued, "Look, the people in the village and Grandpa's house have built a new house, and the 4th Grandpa's house is also planning to build a house. Our family has lost so much expenses, and with your cousin's help, why can't we build a new house?" Lulun was thoughtful. "Is it because our family has no foundation?" Ludakian nodded and sighed, "It's because our family has no foundation." Luyun was very unconvinced. "Why does our family have no foundation?" "Because our ancestors were poor, your grandfather and second grandfather are not capable, and your father and uncles are not very promising either." "Father," Luting called out in embarrassment, and Ludakian glared at him, "aren't I telling the truth? Your great-grandfather and great-grandmother went early, and I was younger than Alan at that time." The children stared wide-eyed. Although there was noise at home, the adults also told them how hard they had been in the past, but the past they really didn't know about the matter, and the adults also deliberately avoided a few children. When the children heard that the grandpa was going to talk about ancient times, they all became very interested. Ludakian lived up to their entrustment and said, "Your second grandfather is only a little older than Ayang, and there are your second aunt and third aunt below, and your third aunt was only 2 years old at that time. Your eldest aunt raised us, at that time, your eldest aunt was 1 year younger than Rong-er, think about how hard she worked to bring us up." The children looked at Lu Rong's little arms and legs, and thought that there were no parents and elders in the family, and they could only rely on such a young sister, and they all shuddered. At that time, we had nothing to eat. We even ate mud when we were hungry. The Lu family only had 2 acres of dry land. Your eldest aunt insisted on keeping it. When your second grandfather and I grew up, she married your grandma for us. And second mistress, married off your 2 great aunts again. After several marriages, not only did you spend all the 2 bags of food you saved, but you also owed a large debt. Your eldest aunt even delayed the marriage because of us. Can't let her bear these debts. Do you know when our family's debts will be paid off? Several children shook their heads. Ludakian sighed, "Your elder brother only paid it off when he was 6 years old." The children were speechless. "Isn't this too long?" Lu Erkin stared and said, "How long? It's not bad if you can pay it off. Your father and the others don't need to spend money to marry a wife. Your mother doesn't need to spend money to give birth to you and raise you brats. You think children can you support yourself after birth? Ask your mother, how many children die in the village every year, what you ate and drank when you were young, and the money spent on illness. Didn't your grandpa and I have to go out of our way to borrow it? Can you pay it off? Even if it's not bad." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 387. The members of the Lu Zhao family blushed and nodded. This is true. Almost every family in the village has a child who died young, and the Lu family is lucky. One is that Ludakian and the others are willing to feed their pregnant daughter-in-law, and the other is the child. When they got sick, no matter how poor they were willing to ask a doctor to buy medicine for the children, so the children survived. The daughters-in-law also know that the 4 old people are so willing to do so because many of their children died young, so they are heartbroken. Among other things, there is a 6-year-old brother between Lu Ting and Lu Chuang. Because of this the child is not young, so after the shift, Lu Chuang is the 3rd child, but in fact there are 2 children who died in front of Lu Chuang, because they are young, so they are not scheduled. Grandpa has no skills, so he can only give you a bite to eat. It is impossible to read and learn crafts. Let's not talk about your father and uncle. Even if they have that talent, it is too late. Your eldest brother is not bad, but now that he has grown up, it is impossible for him to study for exams. But do you know how hard your elder brother works? Ludakian looked at Lu Lun. "Alun, you live with your elder brother, tell me." Lu Lun blushed, and said, "Eldest brother is reading books by the moonlight outside even in winter. Our family doesn't have the money to light too much lamp oil. In the winter, we read outside," Ludakian said with slightly damp eyes. "As long as you have half the hard work of your elder brother, even if you don't have that talent, I will admit it, but if you don't work hard, why do you say you can't do it?" All 3 children bowed their heads in shame. If you can succeed in your studies, you may be more prosperous than your elder brother in the future. You will have a meal every other day, and you will have new clothes every year. You don't have to work face to face with the Lois, but you can't earn a lot of money. If God doesn't, congratulations, maybe you can't even pay your taxes. If you fail to study, you will only be like your father and uncle in the future. No, you are not even as good as them. Now your cousin is looking at me and your second grandfather. Take care of your father from the face of immortality, and when we die, the relationship between the 2 families will fade, and these helpers may be gone." The children were a little panicked, so Ludakian looked into the eyes of the children and said, "So, children, don't leave all your destiny in the hands of others, you have to hold some of it yourself, and now, Your cousin has given it to you, a chance for you to control the fate of your other half. The expressions on the faces of Lu Lun, Lu Yang, and Lu Ying gradually became firmer, and they knelt down and said, "Grandpa, don't worry, we will definitely learn how to read and write, and then we will learn the craft and hold our other half of our destiny." Lu Yang and Lu Ying nodded fiercely. Lu Daqian smiled in satisfaction, and the daughters-in-law of the Lu family let out a sigh of relief. Lu Ying hesitated for a while, but still asked the doubts in her heart, "Grandpa, we only hold half of our destiny, so where does the other half go?" His mother Lu Sun stared at her son. Lu Yuan was taken aback for a moment, then laughed, rubbing her son's hair with her big hands and saying, "Good boy, good question." Then he turned cold and said, "Of course the other half is in the hands of the imperial court and God." The children opened their mouths wide and said, "Wow, it turns out that God is in charge of our fate." Lu Yuan rolled his eyes. "What is there to be proud of? If you can't hold your other half of your destiny, God will just point at you like this, and your life will be gone. If you hold half of it, maybe you can still grab it from God." Life. The eyes of a few children lit up, and they were fighting for their lives with God. This kind of thing is very touching just by hearing it. Don't forget that this is an opportunity given to you by your cousin. Lu Daqian took advantage of the opportunity to educate them. "The descendants of our Lu family have never been ungrateful. I don't ask you to repay your cousins, but you must remember it's the most basic thing not to cause trouble for them, understand?" Lu Lun jumped up and said, I know, we still need to repay the kindness, just like what the second grandfather said about Han Xian, we have to repay the kindness of a meal with 1,000 gold. Lu Daqian nodded with a stern face. Han Xian is like this just because of the kindness of a meal. You say how many good things you have eaten from your cousin since childhood. The children lowered their heads in embarrassment. Lu Ting hurriedly said, "Although I told you to study hard, don't work too hard. Your cousin said that you should do what you can, but reading is the most basic. Our family does not ask you to take the imperial examination. The exam is just to read all the characters first, and then go to learn the craft. After you learn the craft, you will have the capital to survive. If you encounter something with your cousin Bowen Bosi in the future, you can stretch out your hand, remember." Lu Ting remembered what Mu Yangling said, telling them not to put too much pressure on the children, otherwise it would be counterproductive. The children agreed, and Lu Daqian waved the children out, and the three daughters-in-law happily followed the children out. The children could go out to study and learn crafts, which they never dreamed of before. There were only 4 old people and the 2 brothers Lu Ting and Lu Yuan left in the room. Lu Daqian turned to ask his younger brother, "Xian is also 22, when are you going to propose marriage to him?" Lu Erkin said in shame, "I searched in a few nearby villages. It's not difficult to inquire about our family's situation. We all know that we don't have a solid background, and Akshuan is in the army. No one wants to marry." Lu Daqian pondered for a moment, and said, "Looking for someone first, mainly depends on character and family background. If the character is good, the parents at home can live well, so let's talk about it. If the bride price is higher, the 2 of us will pool the money. Everyone can see the life of the daughter-in-law, at least our Lu family is not a family that caress about the daughter-in-law. If you want to marry, if you don't want to change the family, the 2 of us can pool the money and we can always give a decent dowry." Lu Erkin was stunned and asked, "Brother, why are you in such a hurry?" Lu Daqian glanced at his younger brother and said, "You still don't know Aling's temperament. That kid is not afraid to help us, but he is afraid that the clan will cause trouble in the past. Anyway, Xian has reached his age, so let's slap his swollen face to pretend to be fat. We also want outsiders to think that our Lu family's foundation is not that weak. Also, after we found the academy, we revealed that the children can go to school. Half of the money is paid by Alan, and the other half is borrowed from the elder sister. Don't tell the truth, just show a little bit of meaning, Tomorrow I will go to Zhou mansion to find my eldest sister. Lu Erkin's eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, "This is a good idea, people in the clan can't go to the eldest sister." Lu Daqian nodded with a smile. At that time, the elder sister was newly widowed and was bullied by her husband's family. The clan did not stand up for her. Apart from them, the elder sister never walked with the clan in the past few years. Dare to make trouble, but I have to talk to my eldest sister about it. Sister-in-law's place. Grandma Lu hesitated, "Will you find Auntie? Don't lead the trouble to Auntie in the end." Lu Erkin and his younger sister had the worst relationship. Hearing this, he snorted coldly, "She dares. I can't cut her to death." Grandma Lu snorted, and Lu Daqian glared at her younger brother, and said, "Our brothers are not dead, and we can still hold her down." My aunt agreed to Lu Daqian's proposal without thinking about it, and said, "If you run out of money, I'll have some here." Lu Daqian shook his head, "I don't need your money, Aling will take care of it, and the family can live well now." The eldest sister only has 2 granddaughters, how could Lu Daqian really want her money? The aunt didn't mention it again, but after sending Lu Daqian away, she laughed heartily, causing Mu Yangling and several children to look over frequently, and the aunt stepped forward to hug Kijia, rubbing her into her arms lovingly, said, "Auntie sweetheart, your eldest sister has finally vented her anger for my aunt." Mu Yangling was puzzled, "Auntie, what did I do?" The aunt laughed, waved her hand and said, "It's nothing, just let my aunt have fun." It was the first time for Mu Yangling and Xiaolan to see their aunt smiling so freely. Although they were curious, they didn't ask to the end. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 388. A month later, Lu Lun, Lu Yang, and Lu Ying were sent to the academy to study, which shocked everyone in the village. It is impossible to raise one scholar with all the efforts of the whole family, but the Lu family sent 3 at once. Everyone suspected, has the Lu family made a fortune? But Lu Ting quickly dispelled everyone's thoughts. They didn't plan to send a few children to take the imperial examination. They only planned to let them learn some characters for 2 or 3 years and then learn crafts. It would be better to pay for 3 for 2 or 3 years than for 1 for 10 years. Even Lu He persuaded them that if they really had the money, they might as well pay for 1, maybe they could get a child in the exam. Lu Ting said with a smile, "I would like to, but none of them are material for reading, and they get a headache when they read a book, so try not to let them be blind." Lu He frowned, "It's better to save the money and use it for other purposes. Why do you have to go to school? You don't have an imperial examination, how useful is it to recognize those words? People who can read can learn the craft quickly, and they won't suffer too much." Lu Ting said, "Alung can learn things so much faster than others if he can read." The Lu family insisted on their own views, and it was not good for the family to interfere too much, but most of them suspected that they were funded by Mu Yangling. They were hesitating whether to bring their children to Mu Yangling for help. The Lu family appointed Lu Xian a daughter-in-law in a very high-profile way. 22-year-old Lu Xian is already considered an old man, because it has been difficult to say goodbye in the army, and many families in the village are like this. This time, the Lu family gave him a high-dollar gift to marry a 16-year-old eldest daughter. Many bachelors in the village were envious. Everyone thought that the Lu family must have made a fortune. Then the news that Lu Lang met a nobleman on Jingzhou Road and helped him get a lot of rewards spread widely. Lu Lang's reward, together with the money borrowed from Malius, filled the gap in the Lu family. Everyone was envious, but no one said anything about leading the child to find Mu Yangling. The Lu family breathed a sigh of relief, and then sped up their actions to marry Lu Xian. Rural people don't have so many rules when it comes to marrying wives and daughters. After asking about Nakei's name, they directly agreed to get married 1 month later. Lucien also invited 10 days of marriage and went home 1 day early. Mu Yangling brought everyone back to have a wedding wine, and even Mu Shi took a long time to come here. The presents from the Mu family were only 6 cents thicker than those from other families, but because they were the whole family coming to the feast, this generous gift seemed not so generous. But Mu Yangling gave Lucien 50 taels of silver in private, and said with a smile, "Buy candy for my future little cousin." Lucien's handsome face was red, and Mu Yangling sighed, "Biao Xian, you are so handsome, and Biao is so lucky." Mu Yangling said this in the new house, and the other 3 aunts heard it. They smiled and bent over, and pushed Lucien to the bedside to sit side by side with the bride. "What's the use of looking at June? The bride can see only if you are satisfied. Ah Xian, quickly lift the hijab and show us, to see whether you are more handsome or the bride is more handsome." Lucien hesitated for a moment, and carefully lifted the hijab with a steel yard. The bride was flushed with shame, and quickly raised her eyes to look at everyone, and then lowered her head, but one glance was enough for Lucien to see each other's eyebrows. "Yes, it does look beautiful." Lucien opened his mouth to the back of his ears. Bowen pulled Bosi Kijia to observe Uncle Xian's expression curiously. Mu Yangling looked back and took a few small ones out, saying, "Okay, let's all go out, don't disturb Uncle Xian to enter the bridal chamber." Lucien shouted angrily, "Aling, be careful, I'll spank your ass." The children laughed out loud and shouted, "Cousin was beaten." The gift from Mu Yangling made up for the gap in the Lu family, and there was even a lot of money left over. Lu Erkin happily found Lu Dakian, "Brother, our 2 families should use the money to build a new house, otherwise you can see this mud house, I am really worried that it will collapse in my sleep one day." Lu Dakian pondered for a moment, and said, "It's a bit early to build now, let's wait until winter, when there will be more people. A Lang and a Ting can get back a lot of money, and the 2 will work together." Lu Erkin happily agreed. Lu Zhuang and Lu Yuan also took some money out. Their family has always been harmonious, and with 2 old elders on their heads, the money was unevenly distributed, and no one was angry and objected. 10 days later, Lucien went to the military camp with his cousin Lu Zhuang, and only came back for 2 days every 10 days. Lucien started harvesting corn shortly after his wedding, because the farmers who owed their work also had to harvest their own. Mu Yangling was very tolerant, and arranged the time staggered, and the consecutive arrangements would not exceed 2 days. Originally, he was worried that he would have to pay back the completion period. The farmers who were able to collect their own grain immediately relaxed. And Mu Yangling almost lived in the nursery during this time, working in the field every day. Ziyuheng, Lu Lang, and Bowen started to walk around the fields with their notebooks, asking if there were any corn that was different from yellow corn. Not to mention corn, because more than 200 different kinds of corn have been found in 14 hectares of corn. The children in the nursery school adjusted the curriculum slightly. Every morning before dawn, they would go to the field with Mu Yangling, and then they returned to the nursery school at around 9 a.m. to start classes. There are about 4 hours of working time every day. Mu Yangling didn't stop them, but asked the kitchen to increase the amount of meat for them. The children took this as encouragement and worked more vigorously. And Bosi and Kijia were also crazy about playing in the field, because the harvest here was too big. Shu Wanyang and Ant also came to help, and the dragon and phoenix twins naturally also came, and the 2 little ones held hands to patrol, and occasionally helped pick them up. The corn on the ground is thrown into the frame, and every day they go out clean and come back dirty. The harvested corn is hung under the beams of the house, or dried on the lawn, and the children in the nursery are watching, not worried about being stolen. Mu Yangling asked everyone to pay attention not to steal the food, and the reason was, "These are your rations, but you have to be careful, don't be eaten up by birds and mice, or we will only be hungry next year." The children in the nursery school also know that the food they eat is the output of these lands, so they organize 10 teams to patrol and dry it, and Mu Yangling didn't have to worry at all. Mr. Lu has been standing on the sidelines watching the children actively helping to harvest, dry, and even threshing the corn are all done by these more than 1,000 children. He can't help but think about it. Mu Yangling was willing to spend so much energy back then. The construction of kindergartens also uses these labor forces, right? Mu Yangling pushed a cart of corn back and dumped it on the ground. Seeing Mr. Lu standing aside, he didn't know what he was thinking, so he wiped off his sweat and asked, "Mr. Lu, what are you thinking?" Mr. Lu didn't answer, but just looked at the older children in the field, and said, "Miss Mu, these children feel a little uneasy recently." Mu Yangling followed his eyes and saw that the oldest children in the nursery were all 13 years old. There were 26 such children in the nursery. "Why are you uneasy?" "They're afraid of turning 14 and leaving the nursery, so you see, they work as hard as they can before it's time to work. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 389. When the kindergarten was established, Mu Yangling made an agreement with everyone that she would raise orphans under the age of 14, and she would plant the fields under their name, and all the harvest would belong to her, which would be counted as a reward for raising and educating them. After reaching the age of 14, the field was returned in the spring of the second year, and they left the nursery, and the relationship between them was dissolved. Mr. Lu said, "At the age of 14, they can support a family, but it will be very difficult. They obviously don't want to leave." Mr. Lu looked after those children, sighed slightly, and said, "Miss Mu, these children are very good. I mean, if possible, let them stay for a while. Even if they come to spring next year, they will have a total of time to learn crafts. It's been a year, and I still can't even recognize the words." The rules of the nursery school are formulated together with Feng's Hifu and Heiran. Even if Heiran agrees, it will be difficult for Feng's Hifu. Mu Yangling thought for a while and said, "But you are right, 1 year, they really can't learn much. When this regulation was formulated in a hurry, it has not been perfected. I will find time to rediscuss with Feng's Hifu." Mu Yangling glanced at the children who were grunting and pushing the cart with corn, and turned to Bowen, "Go and talk to them. If they don't want to leave, the nursery is not going to work in the short term. We'll drive people away." Bowen's eyes lit up. "Sister, I also think it's too much to let them go out at this time. Although they can work and support themselves, they must be living a bad life. They will be very happy if my sister promises to let them stay for a longer period of time." "Okay, don't flatter me. If you find a problem later, you have to talk about it. Don't act like a mother-in-law." Mu Yangling patted his head and asked him to comfort the hearts of those children, not to please her. And so desperately. Because Bowen has been living in the nursery, he has a deep relationship with the children here, and everything about Mu Yangling is conveyed through the blog post. In the end, Mu Yangling's majesty is unattainable, but Master Bowen it is a partner who can play with them, so it is most suitable for Bowen to do this job. Sure enough, with the help of Bowen, those older kids who were eager to show off were finally not so anxious and desperate, but smiled awkwardly, and their studies and work were on the right track. Mu Yangling took this matter to the bottom of his heart, and after the corn was harvested, the teenagers gathered together and said, "You also know the rules of the nursery. You are all 14 this year or in the first half of next year. According to the conditions signed before, you can take back your own fields and leave in the spring of next year." The faces of the teenagers turned pale, and Mu Yangling smiled reassuringly, "But I heard that you don't really want to leave." A young man boldly said, "Girl, although we have planted land before, we do what adults call it. In fact, we don't know how to plant it, and we haven't learned the craft." He looked at his partner. They boldly said, We still want to stay." The other children nodded repeatedly. Mu Yangling nodded and said, I understand what you mean, but for the benefit of the nursery, for my benefit, and for your benefit, I think it is better to institutionalize it. After all, it involves a lot of land property. The teenagers were even more disturbed, thinking that Mu Yangling was going to drive them away. Their faces turned pale. You are almost 14 years old, Mu Yangling said with pity in his eyes. He was only 14 years old and only went to junior high school in his previous life, but he was about to start a family here. The other brothers and sisters are completely dependent on the nursery, but you are right, you still have a lot to learn. Since you are here, I dare not say that you will live a good life, but at least therefore, I agree with you to continue to stay, but the conditions need to be re-established. This has to be discussed with the Fangs Hifu. At that time, you will send 3 representatives to be the spokesperson, and the others will sit in. We negotiate. When you have any thoughts in your mind, write them down first, and tell your representatives later, and your representatives will open your eyes for you. The teenagers looked at Mu Yangling blankly, and it was the teenager who boldly asked, negotiation? What are you talking about? Mu Yangling saw that all of them were confused, and knew that they didn't understand anything, so he sighed. He didn't expect to dig out his own wall. This feeling is really strange. You have to participate in the whole process of farming, and learn farming techniques from the people who go to the fields, how much grain you want to share after the annual harvest after deducting the tax, and how many class hours I will guarantee you each year, cultural or craft classes, these can all be marked. Mu Yangling looked at them resentfully and said, I don't need to teach you the rest, do you? Isn't this snatching food from a girl? Isn't this ungrateful? This point flashed across the minds of the teenagers, and they shook their heads quickly. Girl, we are very grateful to you for taking us in, and we are willing to work for you, no, regardless of food. Mu Yangling frowned fiercely. If you want to be independent, you have to practice, and it takes a long time. With such a large amount of time, you all have to work hard. Mu Yangling said with a straight face, this is your legitimate interest. Remember, as long as it is reasonable, you can fight for it. Otherwise, I took your land and ordered you to do so much work. Now you have no objection, doesn't mean there won't be any in the future. The nursery school is for your respect, not for your resentment. The teenagers blushed and wanted to say that they didn't complain, but there were also eyes that flickered and were eager to try. Mu Yangling said, you can discuss it yourself. I forgot to say that if you set conditions for me, I will also make demands for you. I will definitely not support people over the age of 14 for nothing. How much work does he have to do every year? How much homework you complete? I will make rules for all of you, and I will explain to you first. I can only keep you until you are 20 years old at the latest. Get out. 20 years old is a very tolerant age. The teenagers are both excited and nervous. The excited thing is that they can continue to stay in the nursery. The nervous thing is that they don't know what kind of requirements Miss Mu will set for them. Fangs Hifu didn't expect that the nursery would ask to re-establish the conditions. He had some doubts that Mu Yangling was reluctant to let go of the land property. In fact, whether the conditions are formulated or not has little effect on the yamen, because since Mu Yangling grows the land of good nationality, he has to pay the tax of good nationality. The tax revenue recovered is considerable. But that didn't mean he was willing to watch the people under his rule being bullied, so when he came to the nursery, he had a rather ugly expression on his face. This time, the venue for their negotiation was a classroom in the nursery school. When Fangs Hifu came, the classroom was full of people. Except for the people at the 2 tables on the left, everyone else was from the nursery school. There are children of all ages. There are only 6 desks in the classroom, which are divided into 3-legged circles, and there are children sitting on small stools underneath. Fangs Hifu paused, not understanding what Mu Yangling meant. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 390. Miss Mew, this is. Fang's Hifu tilted his head to look at the child sitting upright underneath. These children were selected by Mr. Liu, and there are people of all ages. Since the rules need to be re-established, it is natural for them to sit in on it. After all, it involves their vital interests, Mu Yangling explained. Mr. Huang, who suggested Fang's Hifu to make a concession, rolled his eyes, wondering if this was Mu Yangling's show, or to prevaricate Fang's Hifu. Fang's Hifu's face was also a little ugly. He took a serious look at Mu Yangling, and felt that she was still as beautiful as ever. Could it be that she had changed in just half a year? But he didn't say anything, just sat on the middle one, nodded and said, "Then how does Miss Mew want to change?" Mu Yangling turned to look at the blog post. She completely let go of this matter and handed it over to the three of them. She stood up at this time to support them. Mr. Liu, as the representative of the nursery, took the other three teenagers to sit on the other side. Bowen coughed lightly, and took out the results of several days of hard work by him, cousin Ziyuheng, and cousin Lang. Our Mu family means that the conditions for those under the age of 14 remain the same, and those who have reached the age of 14 are considered those who can stand on their own, and those who want to leave the nursery can get back their own land property, and there will be no property disputes with the nursery from then on. Bowen paused, and seeing that everyone had no objections, he continued, and think that you those who have not yet gained a foothold, or want to stay in the nursery for other reasons, can also stay as long as they meet the following conditions. The blog post has been improved according to Mu Yangling's meaning. In short, after the age of 14, if they don't leave, they will divide their own fields separately. Follow the labor in the fields, from the beginning of plowing to the end of harvesting. You must follow and learn the whole process, so that you can master farming techniques faster. During the autumn harvest, in addition to taxes, 82% of the received grain was divided into 80% by the Mu family, and 2 household heads. The seeds, farm tools, cattle, farm fertilizer, and other labor needed for farming were all provided by the Mu family. In addition, they will continue to offer courses for teenagers who have reached the age of 14. They must take certain classes on time and according to the amount every year, and guarantee that they will not fail more than 2 subjects in the exam. During this period, they will be in the nursery. All the expenses here are still paid by the Mu family, but the upper age limit is 20 years old. Unless they are mentally retarded or disabled, no matter what the reason is, they must leave the nursery with their own things after the age of 20. Bowen closed his quilt, raised his head and said with a straight face, "This is what our Mu family requires of the nursery. What's your opinion?" Fang's Hifu blinked. It seemed to be a bit different from what he thought. It was not harmful to the children. He had come to inspect the nursery. The courses offered there were indeed very practical. The children could stay until they were 20 years old. They are more good than harm. He turned his head to look at those children, and sure enough, he saw that they were very excited and nodded slightly. It seemed that the children in the nursery school suggested it. Anyway, they are 14 years old, and those who want to leave can still leave. After thinking through all kinds of reasons, Fang's Hifu said with a smile, "We don't have any objections here. We have to ask the children at the nursery school." Bowen looked at the teenagers facing him. Mr. Liu coughed lightly, and said, "We think 82% is too low, it should be 73%. Mr. Liu was very embarrassed, but Mu Yangling said that he was the dean, so he had to represent the students, and it was best to speak out what the students wanted, so since someone raised it, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. As soon as these words came out, not to mention Fang's Hifu and the others, even the children below became noisy, and some of the children still had a bit of anger on their faces, and turned out to be aggrieved for the Mu family. Mu Yangling temporarily broke a piece of wood and patted the table to silence everyone. Seeing his sister looking at him, Bowen coughed lightly and asked, "What's the reason?" Mr. Liu stopped talking this time, and looked at the boy on the far right. The young man blushed and said, "I just read the schedule that the young master made." "That's just an approximate calculation," Bowen interrupted him, and said with a straight face, "The specific courses and schedule have to be discussed." "Since it's approximate, shouldn't the discrepancy be too big?" the boy asked. Bowen thought for a while and said, "This is calculated based on this year's working days. It should be about the same." Then, "I found that we will start to go to the field in February. During the 3-month busy farming period from February to April, our working days in the field reached 72 days, while the study time was only 15 days. There are only 3 days left. Under such high-intensity labor, can we only get 20% of the grain? I remember that the tenants outside rent the land and have to pay 60% of the rent. We dare not expect 60% of the rent, but half of it is okay, right? In fact, if it weren't for the fact that the friends were unwilling to improve even a little bit, he would have raised 40%, and he felt that they would be at a disadvantage if they left so much for the Mew family." Bowen said, "First of all, we are not the relationship between the landlord and the tenant. Secondly, 60% of the rent paid by the tenant includes taxes. Those who reach the age of 14 will serve in the military. In order to ensure your study time, the nursery school will bear your taxes, including poll tax and land tax. Also, don't think that our Mew family has taken advantage of it. The food, clothing, and housing of the kindergarten, as well as the educational resources we occupy, are all expensive, and when it comes to cultivating the land, to be honest, unless you are strong men, you can only be counted among the short-term laborers we employ. Half a laborer, not to mention those from military households, but those from good nationality, each has 40 acres of Yonjai farmland. Who of you alone can plant so much?" Bowen looked at Zayuheng. "Cousin Zayuheng, settle the score for them." Zayuheng took out her abacus, and first calculated the area that could be cultivated by one person who could get the land at the age of 14, and included various costs in it, calculated their income based on this year's Mew yield, and then subtracted taxes, to get their final income. Then calculate the 82% of their side, how much they can get. With this year's Mew yield as a reference, it is not difficult to calculate at all. Zayuheng also calculated the cost paid by the Mew family, including their food, clothing, housing, and transportation in the nursery. In the end, it was concluded that the 82% share, the food they got, was not much different from what they had cultivated and finally harvested. The difference is that they farm by themselves and work hard all year round, and the Mew family takes care of most of the work, including food, lodging, and education for them. Zayuheng looked at them with big eyes. As long as she had a brain, she knew what to do, and the boy opposite was a little embarrassed. Lu Lang recorded these figures and planned to hand them over to them for verification after the meeting. Fang Zifu's eyes also flickered slightly. Indeed, the advantage of handing over the land to the Mew family for farming is that the other party can make full use of the resources and will not leave the land barren, so even if the 82% is divided, these children will not lose money. The young man only made such a statement out of reluctance, but he couldn't refute it in front of a well-prepared blog post, and he was indeed convinced by the data, so he didn't raise any other opinions. Bowen grinned suddenly, and turned his head to look at Fang Zifu. "Since there is no problem with the nursery school, Mr. Fang, next, we, the Mew family and the nursery school, will talk to you." "What?" Fang Zifu was still a little out of state, his eyes flashed with confusion. "Didn't I come to be a witness?" "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 391. Bowen bared his white teeth. Of course not. Although our Mew family provides all the funds for this nursery, it still needs the support of the Imperial Court and Mr. Fang. Master Fang always had a bad premonition in his heart, but the words of the blog post were correct, so he hesitated for a moment before nodding his head and said, "The nursery is a major event that benefits the people's livelihood, and the imperial court and I will naturally support it. It's just a pity that there are too few people like the Mu family." Mr. Fang is very aware of the benefits of continuing to operate the nursery. Not to mention the increase in the number of talents in their prefecture, the imperial court will continue to collect taxes, and the orphans below will also be able to eat and clothe themselves warmly. He feels that even the imperial court cannot do this. So for the past year, he has been committed to letting Mu Yangling accept new orphans. As long as she is willing to accept, it means that even if these more than 1,000 orphans grow up and leave the nursery will continue to go down. But the time is not yet ripe, so he didn't dare to mention it, but he must have an attitude. He said that he would vigorously support the development and construction of the nursery. What Bowen wanted was the sentence. He took the opportunity to propose that the court exempt the nursery school from serving as the head of the household at the age of 14. Bowen believes that it is difficult for them to spare time when they are farming, studying, and learning crafts. To serve in the military, and the Mu family has already invested a lot in the nursery, and it is too much money for them to pay for the military service. Since the Imperial Court and Mr. Fang said they would support them, apart from some donations, the policy should also be tilted. Fang Zifu's face was serious, and he took a look at Mu Yangling. Seeing her sitting there drinking tea peacefully, he knew that it was her order. Master Fang naturally couldn't agree, so how many people would continue to choose to stay in the nursery in order to escape? 14 to 20 years old, a full 6 years. But Bowen searched a lot of information for this. Naturally, it is impossible for Master Fang not to mention it once he refuses. The two side from morning to noon, and lunch was set at the nursery. The small stove they opened alone, Fang Zifu turned his head to look at what the children in the nursery were eating, and nodded slightly. It was undeniable that the food they ate here was much better than that of ordinary farmers, no wonder they refused to leave. Without those teenagers around, Fang Zifu didn't have so many taboos when talking, and turned to Mu Yangling. "Miss Mu, your nursery has already been laid out, and the stall is also big. Do you really plan to raise only this group?" "Lord Fang, the world is not peaceful. If Xingzhou Prefecture, Hanzhong Prefecture, and Jingzhou Prefecture can maintain the status quo, I might still be able to contribute a little or two. But if the situation changes, let's not talk about these children. Can I help myself? It's not certain to survive." Fang Zifu thought of the sudden changes in the past few years, sighed slightly, did not bring up this topic again, and shifted away. "It is impossible to be exempted from military service until the age of 20. Even if I agree, the government will cause chaos. I can save you until the age of 16." He paused, and said, "Before I didn't think carefully, I looked at your class schedule, and it is really difficult to learn before the age of 14. Immunization until the age of 16, it is estimated that many children will choose to stay until the age of 16, it is also good, let them have 2 years of practice and change their status." Mu Yangling nodded. It was precisely because of this that she agreed to let the 14-year-old child continue to stay. Fang Zifu looked at Mu Yangling with pity. If there were more people like this, the world might be at peace. Thinking of this, he was vaguely looking forward to the children in the nursery school finishing their studies and leaving. He really wanted to see how they would live in the future. Because during lunch, Mu Yangling and Fang Zifu reached a consensus, and a new contract was quickly finalized during the afternoon negotiations. Fang Zifu stamped the seal of the prefect, which is regarded as a notarization of the contract. Mu Yangling raised his head and looked at the teenagers in the nursery opposite, seeing that their expressions were a bit cold, and he was a little embarrassed when he looked at Mu Yangling and the others, while the teenager who offered to increase the income to 30% sat there with red eyes on the other side. She was faintly rejected by a few teenagers. She averted her eyes and divided the documents into three, one for the government office, one for their Mu family, and one for the nursery school. Seeing Fang's Hifo standing up to say goodbye, she smiled and said, "Master Fang, since why don't you stay longer when you come? How about listening to my lectures for the children?" Fang's Hifo raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is Miss Mu still a teacher in the nursery?" Mu Yangling shook his head, "I only know a few words roughly, and I haven't even been to school. How can I be their teacher? But even though I haven't been to school, I can see some things better than them." Fang's Hifo sat down again interested, and said with a smile, "Then I have to listen." Mu Yangling stood on the podium, looked at the children below, pointed to the boy who raised objections earlier, and said, "He is the one who performed best on the side of the nursery school today." The boy blushed, and looked at Mu Yangling uneasily, and the children below also chattered. They thought the boy was ungrateful. "You think it's ungrateful for this big brother to propose dividing the benefits into 30%, right?" After a moment of silence, Mu Yangling looked around and said, "But he is the only one who will stand up for his own and your interests. Man, with this courage, his performance today is above you. Miss Mu treated us very well, we should be grateful to Dade." A little girl at the bottom whispered. Mu Yangling nodded with a smile, "Of course I treat you very well, and you should naturally be grateful to Dade, but this does not conflict with your fight for your own rights. As long as it is legal and reasonable, you should all fight for it. He dares to fight for it standing up is enough to prove his courage, and I would appreciate it more if he could do enough research and prepare his arguments before proposing." The young man who was still uneasy looked at Mu Yangling with enthusiasm. Mu Yangling looked at the children below and said, "I didn't want to say it at first, but since I started, I have the right to be a gentleman once. If I am a child in the nursery and I am dissatisfied with the benefits allocated, I will bring it up, but I'll do my research before I bring it up, and if it turns out I've gotten less, I'm never going to miss this meeting and bring it up on the spot. Not only to the Mu family, but also to the government office. You also have the right to make demands, as long as they are legal and reasonable." The magistrate, who was still in high spirits, suddenly felt something was wrong, and sure enough, Mu Yangling said in the next sentence, "For example, this time, you should take this rare opportunity to ask the government to help you solve the internship as much as possible. You know, you are not only studying farming, but also carpentry, accountant, chef, mason, and other trades. All the crafts in the course must be practiced before you can start working. The Mu family has limited connections and can arrange internship opportunities for you. There are very few, but the government office is different." Everyone looked at Fang's Hifo with a swish look. Fang's Hifo twitched the corner of his mouth. Mu Yangling said regretfully, "It's a pity that this meeting has been sealed and concluded. You can only wait for the next time. This time I didn't remind you. I hope you can learn to think for yourself, children. Of course I believe I will. Hello, I also believe that you will repay me, and I believe that there are all good people in this world, but, you must know, this is just our inner belief, it is a vision. Instead of expecting a person's kindness, it is better to institutionalize the kindness of the family, because a person's kindness will change. Besides, kindness may not be right for you, it is suitable, and I believe you will be grateful, but I am more willing to put all the system is good for matters involving interests. I will be very happy if you repay me and the nursery in the future. If you don't repay, I will also bless you. I am not afraid that you will damage the nursery or Mu's family because of your kindness. No wonder, because there is a system here, you can't damage it. Kids, remember what I said today." The bold young man lowered his head in thought, then raised his head and said, "I see, girl, the system is better than people. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 392. Mu Yangling looked at him in surprise. What she said before was more for the boy to avoid being rejected in the nursery. She had seen too much resentment caused by isolation and contempt. She didn't want to leave the nursery. The child who goes out of the home will in turn resent the nursery school, and resent the brothers and sisters who have shared joys and sorrows with him. Unexpectedly, this young man would give her such a surprise. Mu Yangling admired it in his heart, but nodded calmly on his face and said, "You summed it up very well, that's what you mean." Mu Yangling glanced at Fang's Hifu, looked at the children below and said, "So, children, I hope you are tolerant and wise, and everyone will work together to make the nursery better. The kindergarten also belongs to Hans Hong Mansion, and it belongs to you." The children below heard their blood boiling, and the eyes they looked at the boy were no longer contemptuous and hostile. Mu Yangling nodded slightly, and then let everyone disperse and sent Fang's Hifu away. Fang's Hifu got on the carriage and said, "Ms. Mu, the nursery school is not completely in line with your interests. You can encourage them to put forward opinions and make a good system. It shows that you have a broad mind. I am ashamed of myself. Don't worry, in terms of policy, if you have any trouble, you can come to me." Mu Yangling was very happy to get this promise from the prefect Fang. "Thank you, Mr. Fang." The carriage started. Master Huang said puzzledly, "My lord, isn't Miss Mu afraid that the children in the nursery school will have too much power and control her instead?" Fang's Hifu slightly closed his eyes and said, "You think too much. Even in another 100 or 80 years, the children in the nursery may not be able to surpass the Mu family. She has said that it must be legal and reasonable. It can only be recorded in the system after the Mu family and the government discuss the certification together, and if those children go too far, they don't agree to be recorded. However, it is already very rare for her to make concessions to this extent. How many people in the world will teach a large group of people to fight against themselves?" Fang's Hifu sighed, "If these children have great promises in the future, conscience before they die, they will all be connections from the Mu family, more than 1,000 people." Fang's Hifu thought about this, but he didn't know whether he was right or wrong in supporting the nursery. Master Huang smiled and said, "My lord, how promising can they be? I have also read their courses, and I have dabbled in the 4 books, but the 5 classics are rarely mentioned. Their teaching focuses on the Analects of Confucius, history books. It is impossible to rely on imperial examinations for mathematics, agronomy, and various handicrafts, so I will work as an accountant, carpenter, etc. Prosperity in this world still depends on politics, and only being an official can be regarded as a great prospect." Fang's Hifu also felt that he was worrying too much, so he nodded slightly to reveal the matter. At this time, Mu Yangling was talking to Mr. Lu about the education of the children in the nursery. "Let the gentleman guide you, let the students have an idea and find a way to verify it first, and don't shout out as soon as you have a new idea." Mr. Lu was also afraid that the threshold of his house would be trampled by the students, so he nodded in response. Let the children not infringe on other people's interests when verifying, and pay more attention to their own safety. The world of children is colorful, who knows what thoughts they will come up after hearing her words. Mu Yangling's concerns were indeed fulfilled. After class, the children spread the words of Mu Yangling, and no one was hostile to the young man anymore. Instead, they admired him a little bit, because Mu Yangling said that they can bring forward their ideas, and everyone began to pay attention. Sure enough, many questions were raised. For example, more than 1,000 of them had to go to the valley to fetch water, and they often had conflicts with children from nearby villages. The children asked the kindergarten to build a few wells nearby, so that they would be more convenient. Another example is various small things such as washing clothes. Because of the guidance of the gentleman, it is not possible to report to Bowen and them as soon as you think of it. Bowen reported to them. From these things, it is extended to the study and life. A student who chooses to study printing feels that it is troublesome to engrave a version every time a book is published, because he finds that many words are used repeatedly, because a good brother chooses as a carpenter. I once saw my brothers carving things with waste wood to help my younger brothers and sisters carve things during the homework assigned by Mr. Carver, so I took apart the characters one by one and engraved them one by one. Find out about typography and typography ideas. Because Mu Yangling said that he would only propose it after verification and proof, so he kept his thoughts in his heart and kept secretly verifying with his carpenter partner. By the time Mu Yangling heard this idea from the dispute between Bowen and Ziyuheng, the autumn harvest was over, and she was worrying about Qi Ziyuan's wedding gift 3 days later. I think this is completely impossible for him to imagine. He made so many fonts before, and they were all destroyed during casting? His husband said that he was wishful thinking. Ziyuheng pouted. Bowen's eyes lit up, and he said excitedly, that's because he still can't control the casting temperature, or it may be that wood is not suitable for making fonts. Let's change to another material, or test the casting temperature more, maybe we can succeed. Woolen cloth. But how much time and money will it cost? No matter how much it costs, it's worth trying if there is this possibility, Bowen said with piercing eyes and a firm expression. Cousin Ziyuheng, do you know the impact of a new printing technique on a country, or even the world? After hearing such a sentence, Mu Yangling interjected curiously, and asked with a smile, what are you talking about printing? Bowen explained the matter excitedly, and said, Lin Ke has experimented many times, and the characters carved from wood can't stand the casting temperature, and they can't be printed at all, but he thinks this method is feasible. It's just a matter of materials, so he found me in private, and hoped that I could provide him with a more temperature-resistant and hard wood. Sister, what do you think of his idea? Mu Yangling listened for a moment, and asked in amazement, is the current printing technique still woodblock printing? Yeah, Bowen looked at his sister strangely, except for handwriting, it's always been woodblock printing. How can that be? Why didn't Emperor Sejong, who traveled through his ancestors, make movable type printing? Mu Yangling's eyes widened and he asked, are you sure it's always been an engraving? After Sejong, it's also an engraving. Bowen felt that his sister was making fun of him, so he said helplessly, Sister, engraving has always been the only printing technique. You have read more history books than I do. How can you not know? This was the first time Mu Yangling had asked him about history. When was printing mentioned in the history books, Mu Yangling muttered, stopped eating, got up and said, come on, take me to see Lin Ke's classmate, his name is interesting, who will give him the name of. He took it by himself, and originally wanted to ask Lin Shishi to do it, but his husband told him to change it. After 2 days the students just stared blankly at Mr. who didn't know what to carve. Haha.